My dad kicked me out because he thought I was gay, so I reminded the court about his £5,000 fine. I never thought the person who would make me feel most ashamed of who I was would be my own father. I'm 21 years old, and until recently I genuinely believed my dad and I had a relationship that was complicated but strong. We argued sometimes, obviously, because what father and son don't. But I always thought that underneath everything, he loved me and wanted the best for me. That belief completely disappeared one Tuesday night when he stood in the hallway of our house, pointed toward the front door, and told me I had 10 minutes to pack my things because he didn't want a gay son living under his roof. The crazy part was that I wasn't even gay. He had convinced himself I was because of a misunderstanding involving one of my closest friends, and instead of asking me what was actually going on, he decided he already knew the truth. I tried explaining myself, but he wasn't interested. He called me names, told me I had embarrassed the family, and said that if I wanted to live like that, I could do it somewhere else. I remember standing there with my backpack half-zipped, staring at him and wondering how the man who had taught me to ride a bicycle when I was 6 could suddenly look at me like I was a complete stranger. The misunderstanding started a few weeks earlier when my best friend Daniel began staying at our house more often. Daniel and I had been friends since secondary school, and because he was going through a difficult time with his family, I let him sleep on our couch occasionally. There was absolutely nothing romantic between us. We joked around, played video games, went to the gym together, and basically treated each other like brothers. Unfortunately, my dad didn't see it that way. One evening, he walked past my bedroom and saw Daniel sitting on my bed while we were looking through pictures on my phone. To him, apparently, that was enough evidence. He didn't say anything at the time, but afterward his attitude toward me completely changed. He started watching me whenever Daniel came over. He made strange comments at dinner. He asked questions that didn't make sense, like whether Daniel and I were more than friends. Every time I laughed it off, he seemed to become more suspicious. Eventually, my mom told me that my dad had privately asked her whether she thought I was hiding something about my sexuality. She told him she didn't know and that he should simply ask me. Instead, he apparently decided that asking me would be too easy. Then came the night everything exploded. Daniel had left earlier that evening, and I was sitting in the living room watching television when my dad walked in holding my phone. I immediately knew something was wrong because he had that expression he got whenever he thought he had caught somebody doing something. He put the phone on the table and asked me, "How long have you been lying to me?" I genuinely had no idea what he was talking about. I asked him what he meant, and he started accusing me of having a relationship with Daniel. Apparently, he had seen a message from Daniel saying, "Love you bro, see you tomorrow." My dad had completely ignored the word bro and interpreted the entire conversation through the assumption he had already made. I laughed at first because I thought he was joking, but when I saw his face I realized he was serious. I explained that Daniel was my friend, that the message meant exactly what it said, and that there was nothing going on between us. My dad didn't believe me. He said I was lying because I was embarrassed to admit the truth. I told him that even if I were gay, it wouldn't justify treating me like I was some kind of disgrace, but that only made him angrier. Within minutes, the argument became something much bigger. My dad started shouting about how he had raised me differently and how he didn't recognize the person standing in front of him. He said people in the neighborhood would talk about our family. He said I had made him look like a failure as a father. I kept trying to explain that his assumptions were wrong, but eventually I stopped defending myself and started defending something more important, the fact that I deserve basic respect regardless of my sexuality. I told him that he had no right to throw me out of the house simply because he had decided something about me without asking. That's when he pointed at the door. He told me that if I was going to choose that lifestyle, I could choose it somewhere else. My mom tried to intervene, but he told her to stay out of it. I packed a few clothes, my laptop, my charger, and whatever cash I had in my wallet. I remember walking out of the front door at almost midnight with no idea where I was going to sleep. The first few days were humiliating. I stayed with Daniel because ironically the person my dad suspected I was secretly dating was the person who actually helped me when my own father kicked me out. Daniel didn't ask questions. He didn't judge me. He simply gave me the spare room and told me I could stay as long as I needed. While I was there, I started looking for somewhere permanent and eventually found a small room I could afford with the money I earned from work. I tried not to contact my dad because I knew every conversation would turn into another argument. My mom secretly called me every evening, crying and apologizing even though none of it was her fault. She told me my dad was still convinced I was hiding something. I eventually realized that I could spend months trying to prove something to someone who had already decided not to believe me, so I stopped trying. About 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. My dad received an official letter regarding a court matter from several months earlier. This wasn't something I had forgotten. In fact, it was something I had warned him about repeatedly. A few months before he kicked me out, my dad had gotten himself into legal trouble after an incident involving a neighbor. He had been furious over a property dispute and had confronted the man outside his house. Things escalated and my dad ended up damaging the neighbor's property and threatening him during the argument. The police became involved and eventually the matter went to court. My dad was ordered to pay a £5,000 fine and warned that any further incident could have serious consequences. He hated talking about it. He told everyone that the neighbor had exaggerated what happened and that the court had treated him unfairly. But I had been there when the whole situation started, and I knew exactly what had happened. The £5,000 fine was supposed to be paid in installments, and my dad had been struggling to keep up with the payments. I knew because my mum had mentioned it to me. He had already missed one payment. And there was a possibility that the court would take further action if he continued ignoring the order. I didn't want to use that situation against him. Even after everything he had done to me, I still hoped we could eventually repair our relationship. But then my dad made the mistake of contacting me. He didn't call to apologize. He didn't ask if I was safe. He called because he wanted me to come home and sort out this nonsense. He told me that the family was embarrassed and that I needed to stop acting like a victim. I asked him if he was apologizing for kicking me out. He said, "I'm your father, I don't have to apologize for protecting my family." That sentence completely changed the way I looked at him. I told him I wasn't coming home. He became angry and said he would make sure everyone knew what kind of person I was. I was quiet for a few seconds before saying something that I knew would get his attention. I said, "Before you worry about what everyone else thinks about me, maybe you should worry about explaining your £5,000 court fine." There was silence on the other end of the phone. I could almost hear his breathing change. He asked me what I was talking about, even though he knew exactly what I meant. I told him that I knew about the missed payment and that if he continued ignoring the court order, I wouldn't lie for him or protect him from the consequences. I wasn't threatening him. I wasn't blackmailing him. I was simply making it clear that I wasn't going to help him pretend that his life was perfect while he was destroying mine. A few weeks later, the situation reached the point where the court became involved again because of the missed payment. My dad was furious. He accused me of turning against him and told relatives that I had deliberately caused problems for him. What he didn't tell them was that I hadn't reported him. I hadn't contacted the court. I hadn't done anything. The consequences were already coming because of his own actions. Still, when the family gathered to discuss everything, he pointed at me and said that I had ruined his life. I finally snapped. I told everyone exactly what had happened the night he kicked me out. I told them that I wasn't gay, that Daniel was simply my best friend, and that my dad had thrown me out because of an assumption he refused to question. Then I told them about the £5,000 fine and the missed payments. The room went completely silent. My mum already knew, but some of my relatives didn't. My dad looked at me like I had betrayed him. But for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I wasn't exposing him because I wanted revenge. I was tired of being portrayed as the problem. My dad had spent weeks telling people that I was the reason our family was falling apart, so I decided everyone deserved to know the truth. One of my uncles eventually asked my dad why he had kicked me out without even knowing whether the accusation was true. My dad couldn't answer. He just kept saying that he was my father and that he had the right to make decisions in his own home. That was the moment I realized something important. Being someone's parent doesn't give you permission to destroy them emotionally. It doesn't give you the right to humiliate them, make assumptions about them, or withdraw love as punishment for something you don't understand. And if I actually had been gay, the situation would have been even worse, because I would have been kicked out for simply being myself. The fact that I wasn't gay didn't make what he did acceptable. It only exposed how quickly he was willing to reject his own son based on an assumption. Eventually, my dad paid the money he owed and avoided further consequences. Our relationship, however, never returned to what it was before. My mum still talks to me and I occasionally speak to my dad, but there is a distance between us that wasn't there before. A few months later, he finally admitted that he had been wrong about Daniel and me. He didn't give me the perfect apology I had imagined. There was no emotional speech or dramatic hug. He simply sat across from me and said, "I was wrong about you." For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I told him that I didn't need him to agree with everything I did. I didn't need him to understand every friendship I had. I didn't even need him to admit that I was always right. I needed him to treat me like his son. I told him that the £5,000 fine wasn't what destroyed our relationship. His refusal to take responsibility was. The fine was simply a reminder that nobody gets to escape the consequences of their actions forever. He had spent so much time worrying about how I might embarrass him that he never stopped to think about how his behavior was embarrassing himself. Today, I have my own place, my own routine, and a much healthier relationship with my mum. Daniel and I are still friends, although we joke about how ridiculous the entire situation was. Sometimes we laugh about the fact that my dad somehow managed to turn a completely innocent friendship into a family crisis. But honestly, there is one thing I learned from everything that happened. Never let somebody else's assumptions become your identity. My dad thought he knew who I was, and for a while his rejection made me question myself. But eventually I realized that I didn't need to convince him of my worth. I knew who I was, and the people who genuinely cared about me knew too. Looking back, I don't think the biggest lesson was about the £5,000 fine. It was about accountability. My dad wanted everyone to believe that I was the problem because it was easier than admitting he had made a terrible mistake. But eventually reality caught up with him. The same man who believed he could decide my entire identity without asking me learned that actions have consequences. And while I can't change what happened, I can choose what happens next. I don't hate my father. I don't even want revenge anymore. I just don't want to go back to being the version of myself who stayed silent because I was afraid of disappointing him. If he wants a relationship with me, he'll have to build it again, one honest conversation at a time. And honestly, if there's anything I want people to take away from my story, it's this: don't let someone else's prejudice convince you that you are the problem. Whether you're gay, straight, bisexual, questioning, or anything else, nobody deserves to be thrown away by their family because of an assumption. And if someone hurts you, you don't always have to destroy them in return. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is step back, tell the truth, let people face the consequences of their own actions, and build a life that doesn't depend on their approval. So that's how my dad kicked me out, because he thought I was gay, only for the truth to come out and for his own £5,000 court fine to become part of the conversation he desperately wanted everyone to avoid. I didn't set out to get revenge on him, I just stopped protecting someone who wasn't protecting me, and strangely enough, that was the moment I finally started protecting myself. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment for more crazy confessions I get from people.